everybody, what's up? It's Bells. I read 8 books in October and I DNF'd 1. We're gonna talk about the good, the bad, the amazing, the tears, the anger that made me so mad that I didn't want to finish the book in the first place. Stay tuned to see what is what. And if you're looking for more book-related content, don't forget to subscribe and hit that little like button. Let's bring on the books, baby. The first book that I read for my spooky season, October-y vibes, was Salem's Lot, which I do go into a little bit in my spooky book recommendations video, which I'll put somewhere over here. Solid vampire novel, great characters, great exposition and like lead up into caring about why this town is getting overrun by vampires. It's Stephen King, it's gory, there's kids involved always because Stephen King has some weird horror thing with children. Kids are always scary, I guess. Thanks, horror tropes. I would definitely recommend Salem's Lot if you're looking for something long and like slow burny, make you think about what vampires really mean and how that would actually impact your life. Not my favorite Stephen King book, but pretty good. It's pretty good. Next, I read People Like Her by Ellery Lloyd. And I have a hard time with thrillers. If you've been watching me for any amount of time, I say that in almost every video, I think. The whole thing about it being like a twist, like needing a twist, and that's why it's a thriller, makes a lot of stories kind of just lean into shock value rather than give you something that's actually like emotionally tangible or interesting. And I think People Like Her definitely fell into this one. I only gave it 2 stars. So the story is essentially this woman, this mom, is an Instagram influencer. She's one of the most popular mama bear Instagram influencers. And she winds up getting stalked by someone who has this like horrible vendetta against her. Her kids get involved. The story moves forward from there. The theme of the book ended up being that social media is bad, but it's here to stay. Oh man. It felt lazy because I don't think it was saying anything interesting or that I haven't heard before or that couldn't have been done in a more captivating manner. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. This woman and her husband are 2 of the most unlikable protagonists I have ever read. They are shallow, they are not interesting, they're not nice to each other, they are very good people. She excuses a lot of her behavior, but the book doesn't make any commentary about it. We have enough commentary on social media now where you can do something interesting with it. And I just think that this one didn't do anything new or interesting, and it made the most unlikable. Man, this woman does some shit to her best friend of like 20 years, and it is literally the most horrible thing somebody could do. And I don't want to say it on here in case anyone is curious for whatever reason to read this book. After that, I was like, oh, anything could happen to this woman and I probably wouldn't care. Not a good look for a thriller, because in thrillers, the only reason you care about finishing the book and making sure that that protagonist is okay is because you care about them. Okay, anyway. Oh man, so the next one was another thriller that I was actually really excited for. This one was The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris. I really wanted to like this book, and I think it accomplished what it wanted to, if that makes sense. The story was interesting, the twist was really fun. I'm a sucker for unresolved endings. I'm a sucker for dark endings. It was pretty well written. I thought the pacing was really nice of this story. I just like didn't know what was going on for a lot of it, and I feel like nothing happened in this book. Like things happened, but it really just felt like I was watching this character go from place to place, have an opinion on it, and then move on to the next one. She spends a lot of the book complaining. There was no like really thrilling aspect to this like thriller. It's a social commentary piece. Obviously the theme of the book is like publishing is really white, which like, yeah, it is. And it did a great job at really hitting that nail on the head. The way it ends I thought was really cool and interesting. It was a great concept. It didn't feel fully fleshed out, if that made sense. I don't know, that's just my opinion on it. I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars because I thought it achieved what it was supposed to achieve. It just wasn't for me, I guess. One of the audiobooks that I read this month was Catch and Kill, Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators by Ronan Farrow. This is a solid true crime nonfiction, and it basically is talking about the cover-up of the Weinstein sexual assault story. So huge, massive content warning for this one. It is super graphic. One of them records an interaction with her and Harvey Weinstein. It's very hard to listen to. I did think it was super interesting. I learned a lot about this story. I knew the gist of the story, but I didn't know a lot about the details of it. It was really fascinating and really interesting to see how exactly we protect these powerful men. I think Ronan Farrow does a great job at really focuses on the female experience and how this happens. I would definitely recommend this to anyone who's interested in this story. It's just really heavy, so just keep that in mind, but I did think it was a really solid true crime. If you can get your hands on the audiobook, I would recommend that. Ah, man, now I get to talk about my favorite book I read this month, and that was The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. First of all, before I do anything, like, this book is fantastic. Please read this book. So the story follows two different characters. The first is this older gentleman who has lost his wife 2 years earlier. Our other character is this young teenager, Alicia. Her mom has some really bad mental health issues. Their dad's not in the picture, and she has an older brother who does like a lot of the caretaking. Alicia works at the local library. Either Mukesh or Mukesh, he is the older gentleman. His wife is like a huge reader. And so one day he finds a book, the time traveler's wife accidentally got left behind. He didn't return it to the library. And so in order to feel closer to her, he starts to read it. He was never a big reader to begin with. Once he finishes the book, he goes to return it to the library, finds Alicia. She happens to find this reading list of books that at the top says, just in case you need it. This man comes in asking for a recommendation, and so she gives him the first one on the list. She's not a reader either, and so she starts reading this book, and Mukesh starts reading this book, and they develop like this really interesting, really sweet friendship. This book was just like so sweet, because we're trying to figure out like who wrote the list at the end of it. The ending is really great. There's other people also involved who find the list. A bunch of people are kind of like reading these books all in order and requesting them out of the library. It's such a love letter to libraries. It's such a love letter to why libraries are so important to the community. It's a great conversation about like reaching out to new people and the patterns of grief that we go through, how books can bring us closer together. It's just like really, really, really lovely. I loved every little bit of it. This got 4.75 stars and not 5 stars because I know I'm being picky about this, but they're constantly referring to Alicia as a librarian. And for a book written about the library, you would assume that the person who was writing it would know that to be a librarian, you need to have like a master's degree in library science. And Alicia is like this sullen high schooler. So I thought she was gonna be, you know, like a page who like puts away books and everything. No, she's like labeled as a librarian the whole time by everybody in the library, outside of the library, and no one is ever corrected about it. And I know it's really dumb, but that like really rubbed me the wrong way. Research that literally would have taken you like 2 seconds. What kind of qualifications do you need to be a librarian? Like, she could still have worked at the library and as an entry-level position. It's fine. So it got 0.25 stars off because of that, because that's such an easy fix. But it helped you kind of like reflect on why we read books in general. It was really like inspirational and uplifting and really sweet and super cathartic. Lots of tears. Oh, there is a brief content warning of suicide. Just do with that what you will. The next book I read this month was Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. I've been looking forward to reading this one for a while. The premise is that this family goes on vacation, kind of in like the middle of nowhere. There's no cell service or anything. They're at like an Airbnb and the owners of the house show up, basically saying that like New York has a blackout and they needed to like come back and stay with them. Again, same with the other black girl. Like, I wanted this book to be so much better than it was. It honestly felt really pretentious and it was really boring. I just didn't really care for the main characters. The author was definitely like trying to talk about how white nuclear families act. The owners of the house are like affluent black people, so there's like a racial kind of thing going on there. It's supposed to be a conversation about like who has ownership in this kind of situation. What do you do during a crisis? How do people handle this? And I think it was a pretty accurate representation of how people handle emergencies. It took so long for something interesting to happen. It's supposed to be a thriller. The first time something thrilling happens, we're 80% through the story, and I don't care anymore. I'm just trying to finish the book at that point. There's so many lists in this book that makes no sense. Like, there's straight up like an entire page of the mom like grocery shopping, and they go through and list every single piece of food that she buys for groceries. I get that he was trying to correlate the mundaneness of vacation life and everyday life and how people live their lives. People live their lives like that. They write down lists and then they go to the grocery store and they buy groceries, they go home. Like, I get that. And trying to contrast that with the state of the emergency and how even the most mundane things in the state of an emergency, you're so hyper-focused on the result of them. I think that's such an interesting thing to juxtapose against each other, but it was just so boring. What I wrote in my review was that at the end of the day, I liked the concept, but not the execution. It was written well, but in a way that made it feel like the author was smarter than you, and I'm not a big fan of that. I don't want to be reading a book and feeling like the entire time the author's calling me an idiot for not knowing what's going on when he hasn't given me any information on what is going on. They're showing the life of everyday people, and he's kind of treating you as an everyday person, but in a way that I don't think was really pleasant at all. I just didn't like the way it was presented, and I didn't like how the concept was executed. I did not like the ending. Again, I don't have a lot of luck with thrillers, so if any of you guys have any recommendations for thrillers, leave them in the comments, please, because I'd love to read a thriller that doesn't make me want to rip my eyes out of my head. The next book I read was an audiobook as well, and that one is Polysecure: Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Non-Monogamy by Jessica Fern. It's basically covering the attachment styles and relationship styles for polyamorous people. Jessica Fern is a psychologist who specializes in polyamory. The entire book, she's so incredibly generous with her knowledge. She is so meticulous in what points she shares at different times. We first go through all of the attachment styles, and then she goes through all of the things how you can improve your attachment style in a polyamorous relationship. Honestly, I think if you are monogamous or non-monogamous or in a relationship or whatever, I think this book is great for anyone to read. I give it 5 stars. I think she's so incredibly knowledgeable and so incredibly enthusiastic about sharing this information. I've been in therapy for, oh my god, 3 years. My 3-year anniversary for therapy was yesterday. I've been in therapy for 3 years, and I read this and I learned something new about myself. She ends every chapter with like questions for you to reflect on. This is definitely a book to read like with a journal. So, you know, you read a chapter and then do some journaling about it after the fact, like really sit down and settle into what you want to learn about yourself. She just kind of like explains why you might do this thing, and she gives you a lot of tips and help as to how to get over those attachment insecurities. So if you're looking for any kind of self-help book related to romance or relationships or attachment styles, I would highly, highly, highly recommend this one. The last book that I read in October was The Elementals by Michael McDowell. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really, really liked it. It's like this gothic haunted house story where this family, this extended family, their matriarch dies, and so they all go to essentially like a really secluded rich person beach with 3 houses on it and nothing else for miles. And they go there to kind of like honor her memory, take a vacation, spend the summer. You know how rich people go on vacation in their big houses in the Hamptons or whatever. It's kind of like what they're doing, but they're in Alabama. And while they're there, all of the older folks who have gone there every year for their summer vacations are all scared of the 3rd house. No one lives inside the 3rd house, and it's slowly being like demolished by a dune of sand. The only child who's there is kind of like, why are you guys so scared of this house? And so she goes to investigate. Oh boy, this was a great ghost story. This was super fun, super eerie. Ooh, like shivers up my spine. It's in a gothic style, so very slow burny, lots of isolationism going on. Definitely some commentary on neoliberals. Characters are super charismatic and like all really, really specific and really interesting, clearly based off of his own maybe family members, maybe people that he knows, because they're so incredibly clear. I loved the character work that was going on in this story. It was written in the 70s, so it's a little bit of an older style of writing. It's a little less contemporary, obviously, but it was super successful. It was super creepy. The ending was absolutely great. Yeah, it's about evil sand and ghosts. By the time that things like really get rolling, you are so invested in these characters. You're so invested in the story and like what's happening. Go read it if you want a good scare. The last book that I'm going to talk about is the one that I didn't finish. And I had just started this one. It's The Day the World Stopped Shopping by J.B. McKinnon. Essentially, McKinnon is trying to figure out the paradox between we have to keep shopping to keep the economy alive and we have to stop shopping to not ruin the planet. Now, this starts off with some really nice anthropological research, a lot of really fascinating stuff that pads that first couple of chapters, really makes you want to read more because it feels like he's very knowledgeable on the subject. And we jump from that into what he did to illustrate this concept is he decided to write everything that would happen if the entire world stopped shopping on one day. So he basically wrote like a fantasy fiction novel in the guise of a nonfiction novel. And I was like, okay, this concept is really cool. It's a very fresh way of talking about climate change and talking about consumerism. That was like really clever. I got 4 chapters in and it's so incredibly naive. It's so incredibly white. He talks almost exclusively about the benefits to upper middle class white people. Not in a way where he is actively doing this, but in a way where he's just omitting the life of every person of color, anyone who lives below the poverty line. He goes through and talks about other countries and how they live and how their consumerism is like actually sustainable and like what their lives look like. But he juxtaposes it against the American consumerism in a way that's like very bizarre, because while he's like putting down American consumerism, he's also building up very certain places within America who still consume the same amount. It was really, really strange. It felt very hypocritical. And I'm just like truly not interested in listening to another white man who doesn't really know what he's talking about tell me how I should live my life. You know, he's created this concept, and sure, it's a fun concept, but it's not realistic. The entire world is not going to stop shopping on a single day. That's just like not a thing. I don't know where this book goes. I waited for this book for like 3 freaking months. And I'm super bummed that it's just another one of these like fake nonfictions. I'm having an issue with some new nonfictions that are being written start off like really research heavy, then just kind of devolve into this person's opinion about this concept. I don't love it. It happened with this political book called Them, Why We Hate Each Other, How to Heal, and another book called, oh, I can't remember what the fuck it's called. It didn't start with you, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. So this is now the 3rd book that's been written that I've read that is doing this, and I don't like this trajectory of nonfiction books. I don't like just taking some kind of interesting social commentary piece, putting a spin on it, and slapping some kind of research on the front of it to make it feel intellectual. If you're going to write a story about what happens when the world stops shopping, like write a fiction. I think it's really shitty and really lazy and just not conducive to spreading real information. Like, we already have an issue with misinformation. Why on earth would we want to add more to that in a format that is traditionally usually more well-researched than like internet articles? So no, don't read that book. I don't like the perspective that he takes on it at all. And again, it's like real pretentious and very like,
oh, I'm better than you because I came up with this concept.
Like, the world's not that simple, and I don't appreciate writing an entire freaking book saying that it is. So that's the end of my rant. If you're interested in more book recommendations, don't forget to check out this video if you haven't seen it. And I will see you all in the next video.